You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Cyberspace, the new frontier. These are the voyages of the podcast First Contact. Its mission? To explore every episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. To seek out new viewers and have new conversations. To boldly view what many have viewed before. Welcome to First Contact, the Star Trek The Next Generation intro cast, going back over old episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation one at a time until we lose the will to live. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This week we are looking at We'll Always Have Paris. It first aired the week of May 2nd, 1988. It was written by Deborah Dean Davis and Hannah Louise Shearer, and directed by Robert Becker. James, tell me more about this one.
The Enterprise is heading for shore leave when a weird wibbly-wobbly thing happens, making time repeat itself. The cause is made apparent when the crew receive a distress call from a remote science base. Upon hearing the experiments are being conducted by Paul Mannheim, Picard becomes uncomfortable. It turns out that he marries one of Picard's exes, and he never got over her, so Troy tricks him into some self-analysis before Picard remembers she never makes any useful suggestions. Data analyzes the scientific theories and comes up with a solution that nobody really understands, but it seems to fix everything. Picard kind of maybe resolves his feelings, and the crew laugh over a horribly shoehorned pop culture reference.
An episode of a science fiction show inspired by Casablanca. That can't possibly work, can it?
How can I sum it up in one word? Perfunctory?
Perfunctory, that's a good word. So not ball-achingly dull, then?
No, it's a toss-up, really, isn't it? Is this slightly better than the last one? It's really hard to tell, to be perfectly honest.
What, so you think this is comparable to Skin of Evil?
Yeah, I'd say they're probably on about the level. The problem is that I think with the last episode, there just wasn't much happening, but there were a couple of things that maybe elevated it out of the terrible. Whereas with this episode, I kind of feel like there were some good ideas that have been forgotten about as the production has gone on.
This episode, and I do concede it is one of the most forgettable things in the world, I could see a real direct through line towards later Star Trek The Next Generation. I think if you had started later on in the show and went back and watched this, you would say, yeah, that's recognisably the show that this would become. It's science fiction idea, it's character based. I think there's a lot of elements that perhaps not executed in a particularly well thought out way. I think there's elements there that show what the show might be capable of.
Yeah, I'd say that it's it exactly. I mean, it's a mess. Things get started, things get forgotten, it's all over the place. But there's just these little germs of ideas around the place that are good. Now, often they're badly executed, but there's something.
I've always thought of this as one of the better episodes, certainly of Season 1. Certainly far better than Skin of Evil.
Having watched it a day or two ago, it is now much of it has left my brain. But let's start at the very beginning. We've got quite a nice scene. Picard is fencing, which I enjoyed. It's good to see him doing something. He's got an interest. He's got a secondary trait. Picard, probably the best drawn of the characters, and you'd expect him to fence.
I used to go fencing. I'm fairly certain both of them have appalling technique. I'm pretty certain that neither of them are doing with at their arms what they're supposed to be doing.
I just would like to say on behalf of all our listeners, nobody is surprised that you used to go fencing.
Well, it was the least physically exhausting of all the sports available at university. That's what it was. And I liked Star Wars.
Well, maybe it's just space fencing, and they're doing it really well.
You having said that, I'm so delighted that they didn't feel the need to have shiny suits on or any kind of hologram scoreboards or anything like that. They were just fencing, and that's nice. Often, because it's the future, they feel they need to add weird stuff, like, say, green drum cymbals or something like that. No, some things can stay the same, and we're okay. We understand that it's on a spaceship.
Yeah, it's not like they do something ridiculous like add another tier to chess.
Picard's fencing, and then time repeats itself. That's exciting. I like time phenomena in general. Time travel, always exciting. We don't quite get to that, but yeah, an anomaly I can actually get behind.
Yeah, we have that scene with, interesting move, sir. But what technique was that? The technique of a desperate man. Interesting move, sir. But what technique was that? The technique of a desperate man. Captain, what was that? He just told you. It was the technique of a desperate man.
Oh, I thought the technique was copy and paste.
Going to the opening titles, we see Denise Crosby is still in the opening titles. That's a very important thing, because maybe the audience watching will have thought, oh, maybe she's back in this episode. Because, of course, the last main character in Star Trek to die was Spock. And then the next story was called Search for Spock. So, you know, would the audience of 1987 or 1988, I know you've just said when it aired, but I can't remember now, would they have thought, oh, maybe Yar will come back in this episode?
Do you know, just watching it, you don't notice she's gone. She is not missed in any way. There's no gaping hole in the show. You know, she might as well never have been there.
That's very true. Having just come off the back of an episode where all of the crew are affected by the death of one of their number, it's amazing how no one even mentions it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to have much of an impact on either the crew or indeed the audience, so let's all just move on. And I'm sure Denise Crosby or Tasha Yar will never appear in Star Trek ever again.
How could that possibly happen? I mean, how could Tasha Yar appear in Next Generation again?
Paris. Back to Paris. The Enterprise gets a distress call, and Picard is instantly uncomfortable. It's like a ghost from his past has reared its head, and Troy says, Captain, I'm sensing something. Okay, where are you, Troy? You know, that really uncomfortable body language he exhibited. Thank God you're here with your special empath skills once again. But the holodeck, I think actually quite a nice use of the holodeck here. You know, he's going in to explore his past.
And you know it's France because they offer some wine and some cheese.
I've spent a reasonable amount of time in France in my life, granted not Paris, but France in general. I have never been into a cafe and been offered some wine and some cheese. In fact, I've never been into a cafe and been offered some cheese as an opening gambit.
Also nice that we see the Eiffel Tower, the only recognisable thing about France.
It's nice that they haven't just gone for the typical, stereotypical things about French people that any bad American writer would go for, being namely cheese, wine, and the Eiffel.
A guy comes in with garlic all around his neck.
Would you like some wine, maybe some cheese, or maybe you would like some onions wrapped around my neck? I'm wearing a striped jumper, and it's delivered on the back of a bicycle with a man with a berry and a large moustache. It's very nice.
I mean, it's a good thing they mentioned the wine and the cheese, because when Picard looked over, some people could have thought it was Blackpool.
You're right, though. That could have given a whole different tone to the episode. Well, would you like some wine, some cheese, some tickets for Ken Dodd's summer season? You were meant to meet someone here before, I think. Yes, but it didn't work out that way. They left. Ah, did he? No, Doddy.
We're not doing a Ken Dodd podcast. We're just not.
If you are a French waiter at Paris or anywhere else, touristy or not, you're likely to greet someone with "Bonjour, tu avais une réservation?" Not "Bonjour, do you have a table? Are you waiting for someone?" That's going to go down well with the locals, isn't it?
Someone's been in the language lab.
Well, when Picard is one of the locals, I don't think there's that much of a problem with the French speaking English.
Yeah, I suppose you've got to get over that. Remember back in The Big Goodbye, how impressed Picard was with the holodeck when they did that great gangster set with the automobiles. Here, he seems a bit less impressed, but that's understandable because it does look like a badly lit matte painting.
It's at a point now where it's almost not worth commenting on the sets not looking very good. They've blown all their money on the Enterprise, and then any other set's going to look disappointing. I can sort of let this one pass, I guess. It's only when it's something really, truly terrible like last week that it stands out.
I do like, though, that after Picard has sat down and taken in Paris briefly, he sort of says to himself, oh wait, no, this is a massive waste of time. What on earth am I doing this for?
Yes, that's a sort of unfortunate comment on the episode, really, isn't it? This is a massive waste of time. Enough of this self-indulgence.
Yeah, so a distress call, they follow it up, they get there, scientist, he's a bit poorly, he's like phasing in and out of dimensions or something, and Dr. Crusher has no idea what's going on.
You know what would have made that probably just work slightly better? Just something very simple. Just keep fading him in and out.
Oh, really? Do you think they've got that technology?
It would have made it more clear what was going on. I mean, we get it, but...
Yes. He's been so affected by this. He's in different time streams all the time, or different dimensions. Unstuck, perhaps. That might have been more interesting, but instead, you have him delivering this drama school lecture, and it feels very amateurish and not very well realised or thought out. You've got this science fiction concept which is being conveyed with some really poor dialogue.
And yet, well, I said at the start about there being lots of little germs of ideas that are pretty good and perhaps they just aren't executed well. I'd say this is one of them. Having an episode dealing with time dilation, that's a good idea. But it's never dealt with successfully until the end with Data. That's the first point where you think, right, now we're starting to really see... Although I actually know that's being unfair. In the lift, you get the first sort of glimmer that it's going to be something interesting, but they never play it out as far as they should.
And isn't that a great image? You've got that. You've got them walking into the lift twice. You've got the two sets of them and they're talking to each other. That's quite interesting. You could definitely do more with that, but it seems that they just seem to ignore the anomaly and the effects don't increase in any way. It's just, it's there and we've got to fix something. Oh, okay, fine. So, 1988 was the time of the writer's strike. This is going to affect episodes in Season 2 as well, making Season 2 even shorter. So this episode was written in just 5 days, and not really completed. So, in fact, the director had to phone the writers, and they had to give non-committal answers in order to try and fix some of the scenes. And you can see it's probably a draft or two away from being ready.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's really apparent, because an awful lot of things just... they don't seem connected. I mean, what's a good example? When Troy goes to speak to Dr. Crusher, and Crusher's jealous because she's not getting any attention from Picard. Well, I mean, there's two things there. One, that seems to be following up on a plot line from Arsenal of Freedom that you said was then taken out. And two, that's the only scene where it really comes up in the entire episode. It's as if they've started a plot line and then just stopped.
Well, they set this up in Encounter at Farpoint, where you've got Crusher somehow has some kind of feeling for Picard. Obviously, they know each other, and they've dallied with it throughout, but they've never really gone into it, and they haven't earned it, really, and they've certainly not really had enough interactions to justify it, and it just feels like either do the plot or don't do the plot. Stop dancing around it, because really, I'm not getting anything out of it other than Crusher coming across as extraordinarily insecure and needy.
Well, it seems like most of the people involved wanted this storyline to happen, but Gene Roddenberry, every single time they were more explicit with this storyline, he basically said, no, I don't want that to happen. I don't want there to be meaningful character developments in my show.
I think the result of all which is that the only plot line that's really vaguely successful start to finish is developing Picard's character, which at least is a nice element to have, something that softens his character. And you don't need to soften it entirely, just a little bit, just to give a glimpse into his past. That's really good. Again, it could perhaps have been better in places, and I feel that the last scene that he has on the holodeck, where obviously they've gone for closure, it doesn't really come to anything. But I like the idea.
Is there quite a big problem with the Janice character? In some ways I understand that. I guess she's an idealized version of his lost love, but it doesn't really feel she's got much of a character other than being in a love triangle and smiling and looking very blonde. She's there, but I don't know. I think there should be maybe more to her, and certainly more chemistry between her and Picard.
Oh, her character exists in another dimension. We've said before about elements of this series seeming like they've just taken something out of the original series and just shifted it, and then it seems weirdly out of place. And I'd say that her character is very much one of those sort of things.
You can see when she smiles, like them desperately wanting to soft focus the camera, put a bit of Vaseline on the lens, and just maybe have swelling strings whenever she walks into the room. It does feel like one of Kirk's point of view girlfriends.
Yeah, it's not good, and that brings down Picard's storyline. It gives it less impact, which is a shame. I don't feel that it spoils it entirely, but it does lessen it somewhat.
I think a lot of the problem is, it is nice to learn about Picard's past, and in some ways to see a chink in his armour. But the story itself doesn't really get developed. It doesn't really feel like it's ever resolved. He left this woman to go off to Starfleet, maybe, I guess. He shipped out and never said goodbye. Then he encounters her again. It was a great lost love, but I don't get any sense of that. She's not mad at him. She's not over him. It's just like, oh, it's nice to see you again, isn't it? Oh, didn't think we'd meet like this, did we? It all feels very inconsequential, whereas it seems like this is a massive part of Picard's psyche, or it's certainly been set up as a massive element that made him the man he is today.
With any TV show like this, when you suddenly have that, it's a thing that I've always regretted and whatnot. Oh, really? That's quite out of left field. You've never mentioned it before, and you'll never mention it again.
So, once again, the solution to the problem. Like last week, it does seem to be, this is the thing that it does, it's science, we'll use words to explain it. Data understands, so it's okay, and this is the solution. So he goes down and does this thing, and it will be fixed. No real palpable sense of problem solving. Again, it's just technobabble. It's just, there's a weird science problem, we've got a weird science solution, which seems to be involving pouring some stuff into a hole.
I did think that whole ending was going to be very anticlimactic, and well, a fair section of it was, to be honest. You start off with the thing of him going down, and there's still some security protocols there, so he gets shot at, and the stuntman dives. But then you get to the room, Data gets the thing, and it does look like as if the ending is just going to be Data gets into the room, picks up a thing, puts it in the machine, and pulls a face. So imagine my joy when suddenly we end up with 3 Datas. And then imagine my subsequent disappointment where it's dealt with in the space of 10 seconds.
And it's dealt with Data using a contraction. So, of course, it must be law.
Data's used lots of contractions. I'm not accepting that this is a limit of data.
I think the excuse given is he can use a contraction when he really concentrates.
Was he really concentrating when he's split into 3?
Well, he wasn't split into 3. It was 3 different dimensions, wasn't it?
I don't know. I didn't really understand what was going on with the time travel thing, to be honest.
It seems like it might make sense, but it doesn't.
And there sums up the episode. It is all very confused. The idea that time's not linear, yep, that's fine. The idea of an infinite number of dimensions, yep, that's fine. But trying to bring those 2 concepts together, so what you're saying is that time exists across multiple dimensions at once. No, that's just weird. That doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my problems with the solution, and I'm fine. I do actually think that's quite a nice scene. I do like the shot with the 3 Datas, quick though it may be. Yeah, Mannheim is cured. I hate it when something's fixed and anything broken because of it is also fixed. You know, like at the end of the Avengers, if you shut the wormhole, then everything that's come through it just dies. It's just like, oh yeah, we're not going to do anything to you medically, and you were broken, but we'll seal this. Oh, your brain chemistry's fine now. Didn't do any damage at all, nothing long lasting about having bits of your brain in a different dimension. No, you're fine.
Actually, that could have been quite interesting to have a different ending where Mannheim is still sort of half vegetable, really. You know, his mind is fried by the different dimensions thing. And so you're ending up with Picard's ex-girlfriend sort of wanting to stay with Picard, but realising that she has to stay and look after her vegetable. You'd have to be careful how you played it out, but maybe if you hadn't had a writer's strike, you could somehow tie it into issues of responsibility and needing to actually stick to what you said you were going to do and be there like you said you were going to be, like Picard was meant to meet her in the cafe. I don't know.
I'm sure with more writing you could have got a lot more thematic cohesion. And yeah, time itself, you've got a time phenomena. Surely that is a way of exploring regret somehow. The 2 stories don't really connect together in any way at all.
So what you're saying is you would have liked a sort of time phenomenon where maybe at its worst it ends up sending Picard back in time. He finds himself at the cafe. He sees the exact same position. He could go and see her. He could change the future, but he decides that because she's with her different husband that he needs to just let history play out as it did.
You know what would be a better episode? Is if Picard was stabbed in the heart, and then he gets a mechanical heart, But then Q says, what if you can go back in time and change it? And then he does, but everything goes wrong. That would be a good episode.
If you're going to use science fiction to explore characters, then there are better ways of doing it than just having someone from the past working on some weird experiment that's not properly fleshed out.
I think also this is sort of hitting on one of the big issues here, which is that the A and the B plot don't really tie together, other than the fact that they both revolve around people they've just found. But the time dilation's not really having any effect on Picard and his ex. And Picard and his ex are having no great effect on Professor Mannheim.
And Picard and his ex apparently not really having much effect on each other, which is fortunate given how tight Picard's lycra outfit is.
Well, I think this episode is one of the best in season 1. I mean, it's not a classic episode of Next Generation, but it has a good science fiction concept and it's got a bit of character development. It does, in my eyes, it doesn't do anything significantly wrong, which is pretty much what you expect from season 1 of Next Generation. You expect it to do something really, really bad. And this doesn't. So that's quite nice.
Yeah, I'm going to go back on what I said at the start. This is better than Skin of Evil, you're right. Even with the problems with the scripting, even with the clear problems that have come in from a writer's strike, plot lines started that go nowhere, and just the plot's not linking up. It feels... It feels like it's reaching further. You know, the other one may have been more coherent, but it didn't really feel like anything happened, particularly. At least I kind of felt like there was a development of the characters, as you say, and you know, the sci-fi plot for the other plot was interesting, even if it didn't really come to much. And a lot of the time in this series, we've been praising episodes on their potential, saying as the series goes on, you'd hope those would be the sort of episodes that would be elevated. So, yeah, this is better than the last one. It's still not as good as some of the ones we've had, but it could be an awful lot worse, and it should have been, considering the problems.
For all the rest of the random thoughts on this episode, we're going to go over to Quickfire.
Quickfire.
So they have these transporters that can transport anybody to any part of the ship, and they have this guy that needs to go to sickbay right away, so they transport him to the floor, and then they have to pick him up and put him on the table.
Michelle Phillips, who played Janice, she was one of the members of the Mamas and the Papas. She's a Star Trek fan. She clearly got on for that and not for her acting ability.
I think it's called the Blue Parrots Bar. Yes, very well. Well, you're paying. Jesus Christ, I was only trying to lighten your mood. Thanks a bunch, Captain Dick.
Jean-Paul Vignon, the actor playing Edouard the waiter, is the only actor playing a French person in The Next Generation who actually speaks French as a first language. Well, I tell you what, Jean-Paul, we couldn't tell. Wesley Crusher wasn't in this episode. Did anyone notice? Geordi seems to appear in this episode in the most perfunctory manner possible. He turns up in the transporter room for no apparent reason and then counts down from 27.
Why 27 of all numbers, incidentally?
I don't know, but Geordi is the best at counting down.
Only from 27. If it's 26 or 28, you've got to get somebody else.
He's got a blind spot for 28s.
They're going for shore leave. Again, they're always going for shore leave. They always seem to need shore leave. I do not think that they need shore leave.
Now, in some of these episodes, we've had some odd line deliveries. And I can't help but wonder if this episode has a fluff in delivering one of the lines, or whether maybe Patrick Stewart was a little distracted when delivering one of his last lines of the episode, because his ex turns around to him and says, "I expect you to always come to my rescue," and he says, "I'll do my best." And if you don't believe me, listen to this.
I'll do my best.
Another episode gone and another day of our lives wasted. We'll be back once again with another episode, Conspiracy. That sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to that one. But for now, goodbye.
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 You don't notice she's gone. She is not missed in any way. There's no gaping hole in the show. You know, she might as well never have been there.
That's no way to describe Tasha Yar.
Well, I started laughing from the second he said gaping holes.
I saw my opening.
That's what Data said.
With his childlike wonder.
Oh, your childlike wonder, Data, your robot programmed with multiple sex techniques.